Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies that I have just seen as I am driving home from the theater. And we've got a little bit of an odd duck this time out. This is, I don't know, maybe it's me, because I feel like I'm singing this same song a lot this year. And maybe it's because I'm just getting back into doing these reviews as regularly as I like. Maybe it's because I'm in a new place. And I don't know. I don't know what it is. But it definitely feels like this year a lot of movies have been advertised. You've heard about them. And then you never really hear that they're being released. And then they're kind of gone from the theater before anybody really knows what happens. It's really bizarre. I guess these days it's a lot harder if you don't have a Burger King tie-in, to get constant advertising. It's really, really difficult, because this is another one that I remember seeing posters for I remember seeing it when I went and saw, the Superman Fantastic Four 1-2 punch early in the summer, and then I remember seeing a couple of commercials for it, I think on YouTube or something like that, and people were praising it, saying, it's a definite Oscar contender and all of this, and it just kind of quietly vanished, and I didn't think about it again literally until I saw it for streaming and went, oh yeah, that was a thing that was supposed to come out. So again, I don't know if it's me or if it's just this changing landscape of advertising and, not watching as much network TV where there are regular commercials. It's hard to tell. But at any rate, so this is a film that was touted early on as being, one of the best movies of the summer, one of the best movies of the year, all those things they say when you don't have a comic book tie-in to get people to try to come see it. And its cast was pretty stacked. So it did make me interested to check this out. So before we get too into this, I think it's important for this film, in terms of the context of the review I'm going to be giving, to talk about some of the history. So if you're not aware, let's talk about where this movie comes from.
Picture it. Sicily, 1912.
And what makes you the ancient history expert?
I was there.
So this movie is the latest adaptation of a 1981 book called The War of the Roses, which, follows basically the same pattern as this. You have a married couple who are seemingly enjoying the storybook marriage. They're happy, their lives look great, but then resentment and issues start arising within the marriage until they absolutely despise one another. They're both fighting over who's going to keep the one house that they share, and their methods of getting the other one to surrender grow more and more and more destructive and criminal in a lot of cases, until it all kind of explodes, in some cases literally. The book was a fairly decent hit, but in 1989 it was made into a very successful movie starring Alec Baldwin and Kathleen Turner and directed by Danny DeVito. It's interesting. This is going to come back. Later on, but it's interesting to think of Danny DeVito as a director and just his penchant for really dark, nasty comedy. You know, his characters are always very mean-spirited and ugly. You know what I mean? So he was kind of tailor-made for this type of property. So, giving it its credit, this is not just another rehashing of this isn't another Dracula. You know what I mean? So it's been a long time since this story has been told, and a lot of time has passed between 1989 and 2025. You know, moralities have changed, outlooks have changed, and that same kind of dark, primitive mindset that we had in the 80s, that just don't fly today. So it's interesting to kind of take a novel that is a novel and a movie that is very much of their time in terms of their comedy and their thinking and their view on human relationships, and trying to, for lack of better terminology, modernize it. And that's what we have here, is attempting to tell this very dark story through a modern lens. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Because some things, oftentimes, in my opinion, things are products of their time for a reason. They had to come into being at that particular point in time, because that's when viewpoints lined up, humor lined up, and it can be very, very difficult to try to transplant that into a new time and place, sticking with conventional mores and outlooks. So, yeah. So how did they do updating this, or, you know, telling this story for a new audience? I think for the most part, I'd say for 80 to maybe 90% of it, they actually did a fairly decent job, honestly. So this time out, so let's just talk about some of the things that they change and how that actually works for them in terms of the telling of the larger story. So this time out, we have Benedict Cumberbatch and Jenna Coleman are our married couple. So in this one, and I think this was true of the book, I could be wrong, but in this one, our married couple are British, are deliberately British, so they don't ask Benedict Cumberbatch or Jenna Coleman to put on an American accent, which right off the bat is a winner. I don't understand why you would hire Benedict Cumberbatch and not have him use his natural voice and accent. I still don't know why they didn't let him do that in Doctor Strange or the fucking Grinch, but that's another story. But they play into that cultural, I'm going to say stereotype, but I don't think that's quite the right word, of a British couple kind of having a snipey relationship. You know, the thing this reminds me of in terms of Jenna Coleman and Benedict Cumberbatch's interaction is there's this amazing British sitcom called Vicious. If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out, with Ian McKellen and Derek Jacobi as an old gay couple, and their primary love language is sniping at each other and being very, very vicious.
Well, I never spoke poorly of your mother.
Well, that's because my mother had the decency to know the appropriate time to die.
A characteristic you both don't share, unfortunately. Although the way you look this morning, I'll be surprised if you make it to tea time.
You'd like that, wouldn't you? You've always been jealous of my success. It is sad. I feel sad for you. You're a poor, sad, invisible little man.
I think one of your teeth just fell out.
But it works because there's always this undercurrent of love. You know that they really do love one another. And so it makes the sniping kind of funny. And that's just something the Brits have a much better handle on than we do. Watch an American show where the husband and wife are constantly bickering, and it becomes more of a, why are these two together? So already we have this neat kind of compare and contrast between these two and their American friends, played by Andy Samberg and Kate McKinnon, because they are more of the typical American sniping couple, you know, that kind that, and you can see this world through Benedict Cumberbatch's and Jenna Coleman's eyes, looking at it through a concept of, why are these two together, and not really being aware that that's how the rest of the world is seeing them. It's an interesting choice, and I think it works for the majority of the film. I also like that there's an even power dynamic between the married couple, which is a more modern thing. He is a successful architect who one of his buildings fell over in a fairly hilarious and calamitous way, and she was a chef hobbyist, then opened a small restaurant. Her restaurant kind of blew up, not literally, but, you know, in the, you know, yay way. And now her career is on the upswing, his is on the down. He's dealing with a lot, so he's being a stay-at-home dad and raising the kids. What I'm getting at here is that there is a good balance in the dissidence of the marriage. You can see where both parties are coming from in terms of their disappointment, in terms of their resentment, in terms of their, you know, their stress and the strain. Movies and most art forms have a hard time sometimes presenting a balanced and even-handed account. From our narrative traditions, we tend to expect a good guy and a bad guy, a hero and a villain, a protagonist and an antagonist. And in telling the story of human conditions and human relationships, there is, in a lot of cases, usually a middle ground. But that's hard to do in a narrative story. Usually somebody has to be at greater fault than the other. And I do believe that this film does an absolutely fantastic job throughout most of its run of presenting both of these characters in an even light. You can see where both of their disappointments and both of their resentments come from. You can see where they are both right in their emotions and wrong in their emotions. You know, I like that it also understands that there are external elements. The world plays a role in the strains put on a relationship. You know, for instance, you know, I talked about, you know, Benedict Cumberbatch's, you know, career kind of tanking in the movie, and every time it feels like he's getting over it, somebody reminds him of it, and his confidence gets shattered again, and he falls backwards, which is a very understandable thing to have happen. And you can see how, you know, it's hard to just get over, quote unquote, your entire career being destroyed in a very public way. So you understand it when he backslides, but you also understand Jenna Coleman's frustration with having to put up with it. And that's not easy to do. That's a very difficult balancing act from a writing and a directing and an acting standpoint to present both characters in equal footing, so that we as the audience aren't necessarily siding with one over the other. We're trying to side for the relationship. We want these people to be okay, and not necessarily just want one to have victory over the other. That's part of the tragedy of it, is that we shouldn't be rooting for one character over the other, you know? And another thing about it is, I think that it shouldn't come as any real surprise, but the casting is fantastic. You know, Benedict Cumberbatch and Jenna Coleman are phenomenal actors. They have a amazing chemistry with each other. They feel like a real couple. They really do, in both their ups and their downs. They just are fantastic. You can see why these two people got together, but you can also see where they are fundamentally at odds and why those personality traits would cause conflict in a relationship. And that's, just really good at. You could not have picked two better actors to ground this film. And I think that is the key to this. They wanted this to be a grounded portrayal, a grounded representation of the source material. They weren't going for that kind of over-the-top 80s sleaze. And I think for the most part that benefited them. Notice how I'm always kind of giving that qualifier of for the most part. The rest of the cast is okay. I'm just going to say this, and this is my kind of War of the Roses a little bit, so sorry if I offend anybody, but I have never thought Adam Sandberg was talented or funny in the slightest. He fucking irritates me. He's fucking obnoxious. God damn, do I hate every second he is on screen. I just want to punch his smug little motherfucking face and scream into it that Brooklyn Nine-Nine is not funny. It's not entertaining. It's not enjoyable in any way, and having to sit through constant rerunnings of it, Friends, The Office, and Parks and Recreation is my own personal hell, and that I would much rather be in a Texas death match with John Moxley while he shoves bamboo shards up my urethra. Okay, anyway.
I'm sorry, it's my problem. I'll deal with it. Please continue.
Sorry, that's yeah, okay. Anyway, that's my personal War of the Roses right there. Let's move on. The key thing is I really didn't care for him in this role. Kate McKinnon, who I do think is pretty funny and talented, I wasn't a big fan of hers. I felt she can play it a little bit straighter than he can, and therefore I didn't mind her as much, but still. I did like that she has a really good little bit with Benedict Cumberbatch towards the end of the film that I really appreciate and was very well done. I'm not going to try to requote it here, but I think it was a pretty good piece that they put in there. So yeah. So here's the problem. We've been building to this. I think everyone can hear it in my voice that as much as I praise this movie and think that they did a really good job setting it up and a really good job, giving these characters real motivations and real justifications, legitimate pain and gripes, but also making them feel like a real couple. We see why they love each other, but here is the problem. The book and the source material is dark. It is a dark comedy. All right? And the original movie is a fucking pitch black comedy. All right? As I said, you wouldn't expect it when you think Danny DeVito, but that's the kind of shit he likes. That's, you know, I love the idea that you can kind of get a look into an artist's psyche by looking at the art they create. And when you look at the things he chooses to direct, they're dark stories about ugly people. You know, Throw Mama from the Train, Death to Smoochie, you know, the original War of the Roses, fucking Matilda, a kid's movie, but it's still a pitch dark fucking kid's movie, right? I just do not feel, in terms of adaptation, that this film and its take and trying to make these characters sympathetic and trying to make these characters feel real and make their world feel grounded, when the shit does hit the fan and they start going dark and they start doing horrific things to each other in order to try to get the other one out of the house, it does not come across as funny. It doesn't come across as entertaining. It's just mean and ugly. And maybe, you know, I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt to the filmmakers and their vision. And I think maybe that's what they were going for, to show that that seeing this marriage evaporate and seeing these two people once so in love crumble, and their morals and their love for each other just so long forgotten that they're willing to do absolutely horrendous things to one another, that it really is a tragedy. And maybe that's what it's going for. But the rest of the tone of the, like I said, there's a tonal problem. The rest of the film doesn't support that. Part of the reason why, as I mentioned earlier, certain things, certain properties came about and became popular in the time and place that they did is because that's the way popular culture was. The original War of the Roses was such a huge hit because the 80s were a particularly nasty, ugly time in terms of people's very toxic personalities, right? You can see it in the art and the films of the time, that this was a period where just horrible human beings were the center of so many movies. And the reason why that works in the Danny DeVito version is because these are horrible people played by two actors who made a living playing absolutely horrible people in the 80s, doing absolutely horrible things to each other. The audience was never meant in the original to sympathize or care about our two characters. They were basically there to be the bandits from Home Alone, characters who were awful and did treat each other awful, both having awful things done to them. And that's why when they get their comeuppance or when terrible things happen to them, it's funny in that one, and why it works. And I think you have actors who understood that, and you had a directorial vision that understood that. And I don't think that same thing is true here. I think this is This film is trying to make these people sympathetic and likable, and it does that, but when things take their turn in Act 3, it's very difficult to go along with the ride. Because you don't... It sounds dumb to say, but it feels incredibly out of character. The extents that they go to destroy one another are so venomous, illegal, criminal, that it doesn't feel like there's been enough of a jump. And these characters are not sinister, awful human beings that you want to see bad things happen to. Again, I understand that this film is going for a much more sympathetic tone, but it doesn't work with the source material. It is one of the cardinal rules of adapting. It's one of the cardinal rules of directing. Try to go against what the original intent was, and your project is going to suffer. And I feel this one does. It feels so alien when we get to these harsher times, and just feels unpleasant. You don't want to watch it. You don't want to be part of it. You don't want to witness it. It just feels out of character. I think if the rest of the movie had been a little bit more, to quote Spinal Tap, turning it up to 11, maybe it would have worked. I don't know. But I get the feeling just from the tone of the film that's not what the director wanted. And I can applaud him for trying, but I don't think he was suited to this material. On the one hand, with the first film, you have the director of, like I said, War of the Roses, Death to Smoochie, Throw Mama from the Train, Matilda, and on the other, you have the director of Meet the Parents and Meet the Falkers. There is a vast difference there. And ultimately, as much as I enjoyed certain things about this movie, and I enjoyed the performances, I liked the balance in the characters, I liked the relationship, ultimately, I ended this movie feeling very dismissive and just not wanting to look at it or think about it. It took me a long time to come out and actually do the review of it, because I almost felt betrayed by the movie, especially as it's trying to have it's trying to have that uplifting ending that is cut short by implied tragedy, but it doesn't work in this one like it does in 80s movies. It just doesn't. All right? You leave feeling bad and less like, that was a great final fuck you kind of thing. The tone doesn't match. It doesn't work. And ultimately, I left feeling, I don't know, displeased, I think is my best way of putting it. And I don't know what else to say. So usually when I don't have anything else to say, that's a good time to not say anything. So those are my thoughts on it. So what is the final grade for The Roses? I'm having a hard time with this one. I am having a hard time with this one. Because one grade feels too low, the other feels too high. So I'm going to err on the side of too high, and I'm going to give it a B-. Because, as I said, the performances are really well done. There's a lot in there to like. Maybe my opinion will change towards the end of the year as we get closer. But ultimately, I don't know if I'd ever rewatch this one. I don't know if there'd ever be a reason I'd want to see this one again. So yeah, I don't know. Like I say, it just leaves me feeling very hollow and very kind of, I don't even want to talk about it. So, again, I think the B- is a little high, but on the other hand, it's like, does the tonal whiplash at the end undo all the good that it did in the early goings? I don't know. But that's where I'm going to sit for now, and maybe I need to ruminate on it a little bit more. See it for yourselves, and you make your decision. That's my advice. Okay, so thank you for that. So there you have a review that is of absolutely no help.
What did you think of Samson and Delilah, boys?
Overblown and underwritten, sir.
I liked it.
Thanks, boys. You've been of absolutely no help.
So anyway, so let's wrap up. So thank you for coming along with me. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Thanks for joining me. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.